They are, in a sense, January 6th Republicans. People who may have been staunch Republicans for a long time. They may have voted for Trump twice, but now they have this deep feeling that he's crossed a line, that he's lost it, that he is broken with them in a way that they can never accept again.
You may recognize that voice as Ben Wikler, chair of the Wisconsin Democratic Party and one of the country's best political organizers. I called up Ben earlier this week so we could talk about a group of people who may decide the election in Wisconsin and all across America. Trump voters who no longer like Trump. Of course, in a close election, there are many groups of voters who could decide the outcome. And we'll be talking to a lot of them over the next few months. Black voters, Hispanic voters, young voters, people who aren't even sure if they're going to vote at all. The anti-Trump coalition we're building has to include as many voters as possible, whoever they are, wherever we can find them. In 2020, a small percentage of people who voted for Trump in 2016 switched to Joe Biden. And that made all the difference in a state like Wisconsin that was decided by about 20,000 votes. In 2024, not only do we have to keep those voters, we also have an opportunity to pick up some two-time Trump voters who just don't think they can bring themselves to support him again, for all kinds of reasons.
There are different flavors of soft Republicans, different types of folks. They're often very different from most swing voters. They're often high information voters. There's a lot of military veterans and military families, like people who put their lives on the line and wrapped their whole family around service to this country, who feel a sense of deep betrayal from Trump, both from January 6th and what he said about our troops. There are some voters who are Dobbs voters who are have voted Republican for economic reasons, but they don't like the idea of the government making private medical decisions in their families. The voters who have made it a part of their identity that they're Republicans and now walk away, these are people for whom it's often a big deal. It's a big deal in their kind of soul and in their lives that they've decided that he's gone too far and that they can't go there with him.
I realize that for some of you, it might be hard to understand this kind of voter. How is it worth our time and energy to persuade people who might want to vote for Donald Trump again after all that he said and done over the last 8 years? But remember, these aren't MAGA diehards. They aren't going to Trump rallies and posting crazy shit online. They are genuinely wrestling with the decision. We don't have to understand why they voted for Trump. We just have to convince them not to do it again. Maybe you have one of those voters in your life, a family member or a neighbor. Maybe you don't know anyone like this, but if you volunteer, you might end up talking to one of those gettable Trump voters. So in this episode, we're going to help you figure out what to say and how to say it. And to do that, we've brought in my two favorite Never Trump pals, former Republican strategist Tim Miller and longtime Republican pollster Sarah Longwell, who's constantly doing focus groups with these voters as part of a project she runs called Republican Voters Against Trump. You'll hear our conversation next, and then Ben Wikler will help us wrap things up with more advice about what it'll take to get these Biden-curious Trump voters off the fence. I'm John Favreau. Welcome to the wilderness. All right. Excited to kick things off with my two favorite Never Trumper pals and two of the smartest political nerds I know, Sarah Longwell and Tim Miller. Hey, guys.
Thanks for having me.
What's up? Yeah, thanks for doing this. Obviously, we all have a lot of work to do with a lot of different groups of voters who aren't yet sold on casting a ballot for Joe Biden. But today we're focusing on a group that's near and dear to your heart, Republicans and Trump voters who don't like Trump. So you guys talk about these voters all the time on your various Bulwark pods. Sarah, you're hearing from these voters in focus groups as part of a separate campaign you're running called Republican Voters Against Trump. Can you start by talking a bit about that campaign and what your strategy is?
Nice mug.
Thank you. We did this campaign in 2020. The thing that we figured out doing the focus groups actually was that when it came to the center-right, right-leaning independents, soft GOP voters, getting them to not vote for Trump and vote for Biden, it wasn't enough to do these kind of hard-hitting ads that went viral on Twitter. In fact, Twitter virality is often inversely correlated to actual persuasion of your target audience. Because if a bunch of progressives are smashing the share button, there's a pretty good chance that it doesn't land persuasively with swing voters. And so we were really trying to figure out what would move. Because we heard from so many voters who were Republicans and didn't like Trump and didn't want to vote for him again, but they weren't Democrats and they didn't quite know how to get over the tribal hurdle of voting for a Democrat. And when it comes to trust with voters, one of the other things you heard very clearly was they didn't trust any institution. They didn't trust Democratic messengers, whatever. They trusted people like them. That was their main trusted source of information. And so we went and found people like them, Republican voters who weren't going to vote for Trump, and we got them to make little video testimonials explaining why. And so they'd just hold up the phone and they'd say, I'm John from Texas, and because I'm a Christian, I cannot vote for Donald Trump again. And they talk about why. And the ones that actually were the most persuasive were the ones where the person would talk about why it was hard for them to vote for Joe Biden, but they were going to do it. Like, the more difficult it was for them, the more persuasive it was, because that's what a lot of Republicans were doing. They were grappling with it. And so we took these testimonials, we turned them into TV ads, into radio ads, into digital ads, into billboards, and we create these surround sound campaigns where you don't just see one voter saying it. One of the things that really work about this campaign is that we have hundreds of voters who, and in 2024, we're focused on people who voted for Trump twice, or at least have voted for him once, but really voted for him twice, explaining why they can't vote for him again, because you are trying to peel off voters who have voted for this guy twice, but because of the coup, because of January 6th, maybe because of abortion, they refuse to do it again. And even if they just leave it blank, that's okay. We are trying to diminish enthusiasm and pull people off. So that's the campaign.
Tim, who do you have a sense of who these voters are demographically, where these voters are, and can you explain to all the potentially skeptical libs out there why these voters are worth trying to win over?
Well, I'd start by saying our voters are the ones that are the most solid at this point. So, I'm glad you're having us on the Wilderness, but we really need to do more work with young voters, working class Black and Hispanic voters. If you just look at the numbers, I was just looking at analysis right before I got on. And right now, again, and some of this is a little fuzzy because of polls, but directionally speaking, if Biden is doing a little bit better among rural voters than he was in 2020. A lot of these are some of the people Sarah was just, I think, referencing, which are maybe two-time Trump voters that are not evangelical Christians, that are not Fox News watchers, that rural communities, like, being for Trump is just sort of part of the water they swim in. I'm stealing a Sarah phrase there. And the abortion thing really matters to them. A lot of these people are women, but not all. And they can be moved, off of Trump. Some of these are the infamous Obama-Trump voters, and we're moving them back, over abortion, right? So that's one category of people that I think get underappreciated in the media. The other category of people who Biden's lost a little bit of ground with is suburban college-educated voters. That's more of the, me and Sarah types, the Mitt Romney the Mitt Romney Biden voter as opposed to the Obama Trump voter. And the Mitt Romney Biden voter, a huge gain with them, like huge, the increase offset is why Biden won, frankly. It's like the Atlanta suburbs. And there were two, it turned out among Black voters. If you just look at Georgia, right? Why did Biden win Georgia and Hillary didn't? Well, did better among Black voters, did better in suburban Atlanta. Like, it's like that simple. It's not like these are new people that appeared out of nowhere. They're people that used to vote for Republicans and switched. And so those are kind of the two groups that are in our bailiwick.
No, so I wanted to talk about that because I do think there's a couple categories of soft Republicans that we're talking about here. There's sort of the Romney, Clinton, or then Trump Biden voters.
Yeah. Romney, Gary Johnson, Biden types.
Yeah, that whole type.
Yeah.
And then there's and then we're going to talk more about the two-time Trump voters who are considering maybe not voting for him in 24. Sarah, how much backsliding are you worried about with specifically the Trump Biden voters, the people who switched over to Biden in 2020?
I'm super worried about it. I hear it in every group. It's not the majority of people in every group, but let's say we just did this. So we had a group last week, and 5 of them were going to stick with Biden, and 3 were going back to Trump. Or they were kind of RFK curious. I will say it's not just that they're going back to Trump. It's more that they are turned off from Biden. Like, they got there for him in 2020, and they can't get back there. And this is why, when I talk about the persuadables this time around, I talk so much about the double haters, because the double haters can be across all kinds of demographics.
Right.
But a lot of them are these sort of Trump to Biden voters who took a flyer on Biden because they really didn't want to go with Trump again. But now they're mad at Biden after 4 years of Biden because they're not Democrats. And so you got it. So that's why they're more like, a lot of them are these RFK curious types. And that's okay if they're people who were going to vote for Trump and they vote for RFK. It is bad if you could get them there on Biden and they're going to go for RFK. Because as I talk about all the time, the biggest coalition in American politics is the anti-Trump coalition. It's not a pro-Joe Biden coalition. It's an anti-Trump coalition. And anything that splits the anti-Trump coalition is bad. But if RFK is going to be in this race, you better make it work for you, because there are a lot of natural overlaps between RFK curious voters and people who were willing to vote for Trump because he's not a regular politician, but are now kind of out on Trump.
Is there a difference between, or how much of a difference is there between the sort of Trump-Biden voters who are now thinking of going back to Trump and the two-time Trump voters who are like, I might be moving on from Trump altogether?
They're not that different, actually. The two-time Trump voters who are out on Trump are just people we just didn't get over the line in 2020.
Got it.
They always were holding their nose voting for Trump, and like their line just happened to be January 6th and the coup attempt. And
My dad finally got him over the line in 2021.
Okay,
so
there we go, your dad.
Okay, that's a one-person focus group. Hey, Dad.
And actually, let me tell you about this group, because it's a little counterintuitive. They are old, and they are white, and they are Ronald Reagan Republicans who came for a different reason, who they do care about the Constitution. It's funny because people don't care about democracy per se, but like Donald Trump's coup attempt matters a great deal to these voters, and it is a non-starter. And even if you can't get them there on Joe Biden, I think that one of the things that I'm going to bet that one of the things we see as a trend in 2024 is a shocking number of people leaving the top of the ticket blank from these Republicans who just refuse to vote for Trump but can't get there on Biden. And if they were two-time Trump voters, that's good.
Yeah. Well, let's talk about these two-time Trump voters who are now pretty down on Trump. You've done several focus groups with these voters. As you mentioned, one of the most common reasons they're questioning their support for Trump is January 6th. Let's listen to what one group of two-time Trump voters said about that.
I think he, really kind of got off on the whole situation.
That he had to be convinced later in the day to even issue a statement about it just made my blood boil. And do I think a lot was made out of what actually happened in the building? I do think a lot was exaggerated about what happened in the building, but they were concentrating on a couple events. I mean, people died one way or the other. They died. I don't care how they died.
I just think there's so much more he could have done on that day, to kind of, I think we've said it before, but to be the adult in the room, to try to calm things down. I think, the large majority of the people that, stormed the Capitol that day probably, I think, would have listened to him. But that being said, I do think the coverage of it was, over the top.
It was Trump's responsibility to stop that kind of mob mentality that pushed forward. But on the other hand, I also blame a lot of the media for portraying the events as they did.
So you can be mad at
Definitely
Trump.
a Republican group.
Yeah, no, I know.
No doubts.
So you can be mad at Trump for how he acted on January 6th, even as you might think the media exaggerated its importance, as some of these people did. Or you can be so mad that you think it makes Trump unfit to ever hold office again. What's your sense of whether the salience of January 6th can become a deciding issue for these two-time Trump voters?
I think it can be. I think there's nothing. Here's one of the key elements of January 6th. It happened after they voted for him the second time, right? Mm-hmm. So they don't have to go back and say, boy, I was wrong. Like, with the information they had, they felt like they made the choice. This is new information since they voted for him last time. And I think that one of the things right now in this very moment that is a struggle for really getting those people to get their blood back up against Trump is that him being in court talking about Stormy Daniels is incredibly backward looking. I'm not saying it helps him the way some people do. I'm just saying that it is not allowing people to look forward And what you need is to sort of take January 6th as your jumping off point, and then you need to paint a picture of the future of Donald Trump, a lunatic surrounded by lunatics. But January 6th has to be at the center of why you cannot trust this guy in office again, because there are a lot of people for whom when they see that footage and when that salience is high for them, they go, oh yeah, I can't do it again.
Yeah, Tim, I was going to ask you that. Yeah, I was going to ask you that too, because you hear from a lot of like pundits and pollsters, especially Democrats, who say that January 6th is backwards looking, and it's already baked into people's views about Trump, and what most people care about is the future and what's going to affect them. Like, how do you make Trump's actions on January 6th an issue that is something that could affect people's lives in the future if he wins again?
Yeah, I'll get to that. Just really quick, though, I think this offers a psychological misunderstanding of these voters. These people, just want to have excuses to come back home to being Republicans. Like, these are Republicans. They watch Fox, obviously, as you could tell by that group. We'll get into a little bit of their media diet more, I think. But they, though, when they get reminded of things about Trump that make their blood boil, it moves them again. Like they have to get reminded. And I lived through this for 8 years. I've lived through this for 9 years, where people in my life will message me when he does something terrible. He's like, that's it, I'm done, I'm sick of it, you were right. I don't get you were right as much as I would like, but the subtext is that I was right. Saying, yeah, the subtext was that I was right. Yeah. And then couple weeks go by, something else happens, they go to the grocery store, butter's costing a lot, they get annoyed, and they're back. You know what I mean? They're back to not liking Trump. They're not these aren't MAGA people, but they're back to the Democrats and socialism and all that. So you have to be constantly reminding them about why they hate him. He's got to be in their face. And I think this was a big difference in 16. In 16, he was out of their face the last 2 weeks because of the Hillary, the emails, and we don't need to trigger everybody with that. But so I think that just using opportunities to remind people of the nature of the threat of him, but also about what they hate about him. Some of that can be future looking, right? Some of that can be remember that thing you really don't like? That could happen again. Something similar to that could happen again. That could have a real impact on your life. I think that is worthwhile in doing. I understand why, logically, you're why would you do an ad about January 6th on Halloween of 2024? But it's the people, they need to be triggered. We got to trigger them into not voting for him. Yeah, that's true. I mean, it makes me think of, in that long interview with the New Yorker, Mike Donnellan, who's Biden's chief strategist, said, it's all about what you want people to have in their mind when they go to the polls, and we want them to have Dobbs and democracy, January 6th, in mind as they go to the polls. Yeah. Sarah, do you agree with that?
I 100% agree, and I talk about this with abortion a lot. Look, when we do the focus groups, we always open with the same question: how do you think things are going in the country? And people are always bad. And they talk about inflation, and they talk about the price of their houses, and they talk about crime, and they talk about immigration. And then you ask about abortion. And all of a sudden, this happens every time, especially the women in the group, suddenly people are talking about the abortions that they had. They're talking about their own catastrophic pregnancy. They are crying and bonding with one another. And you're make abortion, put it at the top of their minds. The salience of these things, the salience of January 6th, the salience of reproductive rights. If you take your foot off that, if you let this be about Biden and you let it be about the economy, even if the economy is good, that is not good for Biden. If you make it about Trump, if you make it about abortion, if you make it about January 6th, and you raise the salience of those things so that that's what people are thinking about when they go into the voting booth, we just can't have that again. That's where you got to get people.
Yeah. So the issue that precipitated January 6th is Trump's attempt to overturn a free and fair election that he still says he won, even says he won states like Minnesota that Joe Biden won by 7%. Sarah, you guys have done groups with two-time Trump voters who don't believe the election was fraudulent. Let's listen.
Maybe this is a bit cynical, or a lot cynical, that at a federal election level, we've been doing this for 200 years, and dead people been voting for more than 200 years, and I don't know that that's going to change ever, to be blunt, whether you got to show a driver's license or not, or whatever the technology leads us to in that regard. So I think there's always some amount, but I don't think it was enough to swing at any particular state. Maybe a precinct, maybe even a municipality, but I don't think enough to change the election itself.
There's always some votes that show up bundled, or people get a couple of copies of mail-in or what have you. I don't think that's fraud. I think that's just bureaucracy. That's just what happens. We're not very good at that. Nobody is. All the paperwork. So I don't think there was an effort to throw the election, and I don't think there was enough that did throw the election.
It was like 62, I think, different lawsuits to prove that there was something wrong with the elections, and he lost them all. So there was no evidence. There was only evidence of him tinkering around and trying to do illegal things to change. I need 11,780 votes. There's always a little bit of, I don't know if it's on purpose or if it's mistakes or if it's whatever. But the number was so small. It was something like 0.002%. That happens all the time.
I think they will involve a challenge to all elections in the future. And I also believe that groups of individual citizens will always strive to disrupt the certification of the elections because it's proven that that can be tested. And the only mistake that they made was they didn't have enough military might to go in and actually make it more severe.
Yikes. So it seems from the polling that there's roughly 30% of Republican voters who believe the truth about the election that Joe Biden won. Tim, similar to what I asked about January 6th, I guess what I want to know is do you think both those issues are just the same, January 6th and him trying to overturn the election in the minds of these voters? Or how would you make that a big issue for people? Or do you think it will be a big issue for people, the idea that he continues to say that he won the election?
Yeah. I think that this is more of effect than cause. It's sort of inverse. I don't know that him talking about it that matters more, but these voters reveal themselves as potentially gettable, right? Like the people that believe that the truth about the election, I think are a ripe target for Biden, at very least, to get them off of Trump. And then I think that the democracy and the January 6th elements are arguments that you can use with those groups. I love hearing that, because 30%, on one hand, it's shockingly low, right? 30% of Republicans believe the truth about the election. That's pretty alarming. On the other, that's a ton of people. That's right. 30 million people, right? And so I love hearing from these groups. It's a reminder. It's oh yeah, here are people that believe that bureaucracy is bloated, dead people vote, there are a lot of fraud in elections, but Donald Trump's still a liar. Right? You don't think about that person in your mind's eye, right? The person you're thinking about is either I think Donald Trump's a liar, or I totally, or I'm wearing the red hat and listening to Maria Barrett Romo, right? And so that type of person, I think if you keep them in your mind's eye, they can be persuaded on this stuff because they've lost trust in him, and at minimum they can be moved off of him into this anti-Trump coalition Sarah's talking about. That I think that then there's some other challenges related to how you can then persuade them conceivably to come to the other side.
Sarah, what else have you heard from these voters about how they view the salience of Trump's election lies?
Yeah, well, I've been obsessed with this 30%. Both the number, because it shows up in other places. A lot of the polls that ask, would you vote differently? Would it impact your vote if Trump's convicted of a crime? Among self-ID'd Republicans, roughly 30%. In states where Nikki Haley was actively contesting the election, self-ID'd Republicans, she was getting about 30% of the vote. So this is the persuadable people. So I live with these people in my head. Who are they? What do they think? And as I was digging in on the election stuff in particular, it was a little disheartening because you sort of wanted to hear from them say, yeah, this guy's insane. And of course the election was free and fair, but that's not what they say. They say dead people vote. Of course there's fraud. But they basically say not enough to really turn things over. But what was interesting is that this 30% of people, or these people who don't think it was stolen, have a few things in common. One, they've got a diverse media mix that they ingest. And by diverse media mix, I don't mean Fox News and then Steve Bannon and then, Tim Pool. I mean that they flip around from Fox and CNN and their local news. And local news is really big. And one of the things we've just found is people who are in this persuadable category tend to be less plugged into cable and a little more plugged into their local channels and like what's going on in their home state, which has an advertising opportunity. Like I think about that when I think about how to reach these folks. The other thing that's jumped out is that they either, if they really believe the election was free and fair, they tended to have either proximity to people who worked on elections. Like they're like, I know somebody who worked on the election. One guy was in Maricopa County. He'd worked on the election himself. Or they'd had states with these recounts. This ones where they'd had a ton of recounts, which are in the contested swing states. They were like, I don't know. They looked at this 100 times. There was no fraud. Nobody could find it. The cyber ninjas didn't catch anybody. The bamboo wasn't there. And so they're like, I think that it was fine. And then the third thing that was interesting about them is they just had a higher level of trust in the system overall. They tended to talk about checks and balances. Like, I don't know, this is America and we do elections okay. And it probably aren't switching the votes with the machines. And so that is sort of something that they all have in common that I think is an interesting picture of who our voter is to persuade.
I saw you quoted in this Bloomberg piece this week about the possibility of Trump serving a third term or maybe forever, and that's something that's coming up in different focus groups that different people are doing from undecided voters who are actually, that's like one of their big concerns, that either he'll stay forever or there'll be a Trump family monarchy and we'll be doing this till Barron's president. Do you what's your sense of how salient that could be as an argument, how effective that could be?
Yeah. I mean, because people are, I mean, it is coming up in groups where they're just like, I'm not sure he'll leave, or like he might run again. Like, and sometimes there's actually some people who say that and it doesn't matter that much to them. Like, it's fine. They're like, okay, and cool, Trump forever. But for a lot of people, this idea of he won't leave, he won't abide by the rules matters. And that is a January 6th argument. And this is what I mean about like January 6th salience. It's not just about January 6th. It's not just about the visuals of the cops getting hit and things we've seen sort of over and over again. This is the kind of guy he is. He is a lunatic who will be surrounded by other lunatics and he won't leave. And you tell people that and they're like, yeah, that'd be a real problem if he just didn't leave. Maybe I shouldn't vote him in.
Yeah, I mean, it sounds like liberal alarmism to be like, oh God, this could be your last election and the last time you get to vote and he'll be there forever. But it does feel like, A, it has the benefit of being potentially true. And B, we do have some evidence that he tried to do that last time. What do you think, Tim?
Yeah, and this is where I think the RVAT project's important, having this come from regular people's voices rather than like Barack Obama's spokesperson. I probably don't think you're that compelling of a messenger. We won't want to put you on TV in Maricopa County.
Damn.
Excuse me, speachwriter. Sorry, that was Tommy.
Yeah,
It was Tommy. So my bad. So I think messenger matters here, and I think that a compelling persuasion message is more like risky. It's like, think about how Nikki Haley talked about this. Chaos, risky. Like, might he stay? I don't like, isn't the fact that we're talking about this ridiculous? Yeah. That you might be worried about this? Like, isn't this a risk that's not worth taking? And so I think if you kind of combine that with maybe somewhere in their periphery, they're seeing ads on social media that feature Donald Trump making jokes about this, so it like sticks in their head. I think that could be a potent kind of 1-2 combo to try to just make the pitch to these voters that this isn't worth the risk, and that make it really back to being an election about Trump, right? Not like a choice, not a Biden-Trump choice election. And I think that also goes back to the salience.
And
Go
not
ahead, Sarah.
democracy. Like, saying democracy doesn't mean anything to people, but like, dude won't leave means something to people. Like,
Risky.
they get that.
Like,
Yeah.
he might, the Capitol might get charged. Like, who knows? Like, he might put his family in charge of the military. Like, you just don't know. Like, risky. Like, it's just like, is this worth it, right? Like, less than these, high-minded principles. John Meacham. I love John Meacham, but, Yeah,
no, I don't think he's going to be a persuasive messenger to these voters either.
No.
All right, so we are on the verge of a verdict in what may be the only Trump criminal trial that happens before the election. Polling suggests that most voters aren't paying close attention, and the fact of Trump being on trial for felony charges hasn't really changed many opinions, though there's also a good deal of polling that suggests that may change if he's found guilty. Sarah, you guys asked some Trump voters who supported Nikki Haley in the primary about these trials. Let's hear what they had to say.
The most damaging case will be trying to overthrow the election. that it's hard to prove. So, but all the other cases is just overreaching, and I don't think it's going to go anywhere, and I don't think you're going to get conviction. It's just a waste of taxpayer money.
When he became president, there were Democrats in Congress saying they wanted to impeach him before he'd even served one day in office. And there's been nothing short of that effort to, muddy the waters and make him look bad from the very beginning. Of all the cases, the one that I think probably is the most serious is the classified documents one. But then Biden had classified documents, and even Pence ended up with saying, "Oh wait, I found one in my house too," which just makes me think they're all rather careless.
It seems to me like liberals in the country are saying Donald Trump's a criminal. Let's find a crime to pin him with. Let's throw all this stuff against the wall and see what sticks. Because I think it's all politically motivated. Clearly, you look at the platforms of the state prosecutors and attorney generals who ran and won and who ended up prosecuting him. That was their platform. I'm going to get Trump. Vote me in. I'm going to get Trump.
Okay.
I don't know how you do this, Sarah. I honor you every day.
Kidding, I love it.
I do too. I think it's so fascinating.
My blood pressure is going up 20 points in the last minute. I can feel it.
Let's live in a wonderful world where Trump is found guilty in the Manhattan case. We got a convicted felon running for president. Is that not an argument we should be making to those undecided voters? Like, what do you guys think?
100%. 100%. People are doing a weird thing right now. So, first of all, if he is acquitted, it is an actual disaster. Like, the downside of acquittal, so much bigger than upside of a conviction, which is just the terrible world that we live in. However, a conviction matters. And one of the things that I'm kind of pushing people on TV, there's this way that people say, well, this is all just helping Trump. All helps Trump. Even if he's convicted, it helps Trump's. That's primary analysis. Yes, with base voters, this stuff who think that it is rigged, who think it's a two-tier justice system, and thinks that they're out to get Trump, helps them. Those people are all going to vote for Trump anyway. Doesn't matter. These swing voters and the people who are on the fence who have to hold their nose, him being a convicted felon will matter and does matter. And look, you can tell me that it's marginal, and I'll tell you, cool, because margins are going to decide this entire ballgame. So I'll take marginal if it has a marginal effect.
Yeah. Tim, what do you think?
I got no fucking idea. I honestly just don't. I don't know. It's not what I'm supposed to do, but I don't know. I've got no idea. I could see it making a difference. I could see it not. These voters don't know either, right? Like, the focus groups actually don't tell us anything on this, really. And you learn a little bit about how they think, which I think is important. But, the specific question, you heard that guy. He was like, I don't even think he's going to be convicted. So, what is that? What does it, do any of them, again, not the MAGAs, do any of the people that have a media mix, most of these folks are college educated, the types, most people have people in their lives that are not Republican. Does that group, do any of them start to see him differently when he's a felon, start to think about it differently? Maybe. I don't know. Maybe not. I think it's very hard to say. And it's annoying. It's frustrating. I mean, because he and there was some really damning testimony here in this thing, about how Stormy Daniels talking about how he essentially coerced her into sex with a security guard standing outside. You would think people would not want that person to be president, but I don't know. I don't think we have a lot of evidence of that at this point.
Well, part of this is if there is a
Go ahead, Sarah. Disagree. Sarah disagrees with me.
No,
it's
his show. We're not on our show. We're on his show.
You made a disagree face,
so I'm not going to just jump in.
You know what? I'll go to Sarah on this. I mean, okay, but part of this is let's say there's a guilty verdict. It's all over the news for a couple days. It even filters down to local news, right? It breaks through everywhere.
Sure.
And then the question is, do Democratic campaigns, does Sarah's campaign, to other groups, do you keep pushing that message to keep reminding people of it between now and November? Because then by September, it's like, oh yeah, he's just a convicted felon, but we don't really talk about that anymore because we've all moved on. And that's sort of the question that I have. Sarah, what do you think?
Well, we would be making a mistake if we failed to mention it. If he's a convicted felon and we're not talking about that, that's on us. You absolutely should be talking about it. Joe Biden should be talking about it. A lot of good material in this guy, a lot of orange jokes, orange jumpsuits, orange. I mean, I'm just, there's you, and yeah, but the being able to, and again, this is why I go to like the acquittal is so much worse. Like a conviction, it does give you something to push. And also get this guy out of the courtroom, get him out there so that he is in people's faces. Tim was talking about this before. I also think it's very important that Trump be high salience, because if it's a referendum on Biden, Biden loses. If it's a referendum on Trump, Trump loses. And so we got to get Trump talking to us. The media's got to cover him. They got to take the insane things that he's saying at these Trump rallies live, but get him out of court with a conviction, and he'll be nuts about it. He will be so upset, and then push him on it all the time. I do think it matters to these marginal swing voters who are not paying attention. Listen, here's the thing about this. This is what I was going to disagree with Tim about. Nobody's following this case, the court stuff.
Yeah.
I mean, they're just like, and they can't follow it. They don't know who these people are. They don't know the characters. I mean, unless you're upset, and because they can't see what's happening in the courtroom, they're getting the stuff filtered. And so one of the most interesting, I was talking to a group the other day, and the woman was talking about how, well, I turn on Fox, and I think the case is going to get thrown out. And then I turn on ABC, and Trump's going to jail. And like, she's like, what is even happening here? What's going on? Because they're getting it through these media filters. And so I think that people still trust the courts and jury of your peers more than they trust other things. I'm not saying it's like the highest thing, but they trust it. And to say a jury of his peers convicted him of this on top of the E. Jean Carroll stuff, but this is like a real, that was a civil case. This is a criminal case. And so like, I just think it matters. I do. I think it, again, not to everybody, but you are talking about 10,000 votes one way or the other across 6 states.
Yeah. Before we move on from this group, these were voters who cast their ballots for Nikki Haley in the primary. There's been a lot of excitement in the anti-Trump universe about even after she dropped out, she's still getting like 15, 20% in some places in some of these primaries. What's your sense of, okay, some of these voters could just be, I mean, there is the Democrats just voted in the Republican primary. There's also, a lot of these voters could just be Republicans who already voted for Joe Biden in 2020, and so they're just continuing with just voting against Trump. What's your sense of like how many are truly just like maybe these two-time Trump voters who were like potentially done with him, and that was the signal for that is that we're voting for Nikki Haley in the primary?
Tim and I sort of disagree on this.
Okay,
we've been fighting about this on our show for a while, and here's what I'll say. Look, in that Nikki Haley cohort, there are people who already voted for Joe Biden. There are people who are going to go home to Trump. And then the rest are the double haters, right? That you were trying to make them hate Trump more than they hate Biden, right? And that's who you're fighting over. But here's what I have found encouraging about it, is that in these states where they are closed primaries, meaning that, libs can't vote in them, there are people who are motivated enough. Nikki Haley's not on the ballot and hasn't been on, or she's on it technically, but she hasn't been in the race for months, and people are getting up to go out and vote against Trump. They're not voting for Nikki Haley. This is not a pro-Nikki Haley coalition. They care enough to go vote against Donald Trump, and I think that expresses something about enthusiasm, meaning sort of enthusiasm against Trump, and I think that matters. I have found that encouraging. I don't think that every person in that cohort, you can just be like, ooh, well, this means 150,000 people in Pennsylvania, we've got our lock on. But I do think it matters. But go ahead, Tim.
I'm just not as excited about this as everybody else. I'm sorry. I hate to be the Debbie Downer. There's some good part. Here's the good part about it. And this is what I'm saying. Our people are solid. My people, Sarah's people. Like the college-educated, highly engaged, reading the news, anti-Trump Republicans. Most of them already voted against him in 2020. Most of them have been turning out to vote against Carrie Lake and Blake Masters and Doug Mastriano in the midterms. And they're turning up again to vote against Donald Trump in the primary. And so, like, that's good news. Like, there is, like, one of the most highly engaged demos against Donald Trump is our people. So our people do matter in that sense. I just, like, the number isn't as big as it seems, right? Like, so when you look at that 20%, it's like, well, that's not 20% of the whole Republican electorate. That's 20% of the people that turned out, right? And as Sarah said, the anti-Trump Republicans are very excited to turn out. So our people are turning out at a disproportionate rate. And many of them already voted for Joe Biden. Many of them already voted for Democrats in the midterms. And so that's a good thing that they're still motivated, right? It could be worse, right? They could be not motivated. They could be mad about Joe Biden because of student loan bailout or whatever. They could be mad, that Joe Biden hasn't been nicer to BB or whatever and not turning out anymore. So it's good news that they're still engaged. But it's just not quite as good news as it might seem on its face. I think that there are other people, there are double haters in there. There are people that voted for Trump twice in there that are gettable. I think that Joe Biden, has this awesome now group in all of these states of anyone that voted by mail, okay, we now know that these are rational people. If you looked at Pennsylvania, it was crazy. Nikki Haley got tied among the mail voters and then lost 90-10 on election day. So now we know, if you look at who requested a mail ballot, that's somebody that Joe Biden people can go knock on their door and think that these people, don't believe that Hugo Chavez and the Pillow Man, stole the, we're part of a plot to steal the election. So that's good. So there's some good parts. It's just not quite as good as I think that maybe it's made out to be.
All right, let's wrap up with how to actually communicate with these gettable two-time Trump voters. We've been talking a little bit about media diet and how that differentiates them. Let's play a clip of one of the groups talking about their media diet.
I don't have a single source. I don't really trust anybody. Usually what happens is I'll either hear of something. I've deleted all of my social media because I'm tired of algorithmic news. Mm-hmm. And so if I hear something, I'll look up information about it and try to get multiple sources because there's usually a spin in one way or the other. And so the truth is somewhere in between there.
Primarily NPR, but I switch between different channels and just compare the news. So I know that some media are leaning toward Republicans, some leaning toward the left, and it's good to listen to both channels and then formulate your own opinion.
If I see a story that interests me, if it leads me to CNN at first, I'll go to Fox News after and maybe check some of the other ones like BBC or NPR or whatever.
The process I have to go through is to filter the news from each source as to what their agendas are, how thorough they are, how balanced, what agendas they have, what the editorial bias is. And then you have to filter that and form your own thoughts, in addition to some anecdotal things.
Sarah, you were talking about this a little bit earlier, but what does this tell you about their media diet? What does that tell you about where and how to break through to these voters?
Yeah, so can I just tell you one thing that I find to be a conundrum or an enigma about these folks is that I don't know if they seem more rational to us. What?
Telling you the truth. I think that some of those people are lying about their media consumption.
So I will say the number of times that people say BBC in the groups, I'm like, no way. No chance that this many people watch BBC.
This happened at all the wilderness groups I did last season. Yeah. I heard BBC all the time. I was
it's
like,
so
what's
funny.
going on?
It sounds smart. It's like a thing people say that. So I agree.
One guy said NPR, then the other lady's like, I look at other things, whatever, NPR, you don't ever go to NPR. I'm sorry. So there's some mistruth.
So I think that's true, Tim, that they are reaching in this moment to be I want to sound smart and whatever. That being said, I think there is something about people who are, and this is where I was going to say the enigma is the chicken or egg. Are they naturally curious and therefore seeking out more, disparate opinions, and I want to see things that might disagree with me, or are they changing their mind because they go around, checking out other things, I sort of don't know which is the driver of it. I suspect it's a little bit of both, that they are naturally curious people who want to see I know that Fox News is biased to the right. I think MSNBC is biased to the left. I'm going to go watch both and see if I can figure it out for myself. Now, that's good to know about a person though, because it means that those are the types of people who are open to persuasion. They pursue persuasion, right? They pursue alternate set of details to learn a lot about it. And so if people like that are sort of watching local news or they're checking things that's good for knowing how to target them, and how to think about we run a lot of ads now on local news because I've been listening to voters talk about a media diet that includes local news, and that is one of the number one things that indicates they don't believe the election was stolen.
Yeah.
I watch more local news than cable.
So Sarah, you've said before that we're not building a pro-Biden coalition, we're building an anti-Trump coalition. So obviously it's a win if we get someone to just leave the top of the ballot blank. It's even better if we can get someone to actually vote for Joe Biden. What are the biggest reservations about Biden with a lot of these voters, and what do you think is the best way to help these voters overcome these reservations?
I'm going to blow your mind with this take. It's because he's old. Yeah, I mean, that's it. Like when people and left, right, and center, people talk about just feeling like they can't connect with him. Like he's old. They don't think he's up to the job. And that's just what you hear. There's a reason the media talks about it. It's because that's what voters talk about. Even the ones who are deeply sympathetic to Joe Biden do this thing where they like crouch and they say, I just get so worried when he talks and when he walks. Like, I want to make sure he's okay. I want to like help him. They like, they can see them like reaching for him to steady him. And so, look, I think that that's a big part of the problem, which is why I do think it's much more about a negative campaign on Trump this time. And I also think, here's the other thing, though, that voters really understand. They understand the president doesn't do it alone, which is why for Trump, you have to make sure they know he is a lunatic who will be surrounded by other lunatics, and that Joe Biden is an old but good man surrounded by young and good people. Like you have to, I do think that I'm just a big advocate for a much more robust surrogate game, a much more investment in voters knowing who the people are who are around Joe Biden, because voters talk about it all the time, that they know it's not just him. And so you got to sort of give them a sense that, because they're just afraid, does he have it for the next 4 years? The world feels dangerous. The economy feels precarious. Whether that's true or not, that's how they feel about it. And so they want somebody who can do the job. And even though Trump is not that much younger, he does have big lunatic energy. And so when people are just like smelling the vibes, they see Trump and they think he seems not sane exactly, but more up to it.
Yeah. Tim, is it pretty much just age, or what else are you hearing in your many chat groups with people who are still Trump curious Republicans?
Yeah, I mean, I think that I think it's selection bias, and I think that there is a small but vocal group of people that are upset with him about Israel, like I was joking about earlier. But I don't know that that's very representative about what's happening in Arizona. I trust Sarah's focus groups on this more than people that text me that used to work for Mitt Romney or whatever. I don't think that's representative of the mean voter. Look, I think this. I don't. Like the Sister Soldier thing is so stupid and so overplayed. People don't even remember what really happened. That's a side thing that folks can Google the real story there. Joe Biden reassuring people that he's not going to go in with the far left would help. There's like a weird, media-driven view that Joe Biden's big problem is with the progressive left. He's got some problems over there, but like if you just look at the data, his problem is actually with centrist Black and Latino people. Mostly. That's
some people don't even think exist, right?
Who don't?
Some liberals.
They exist.
And he's down like 20% with them. Like if you look at where he was in 16 versus now, and you just look at the polls caveat. But like if you, just based on all the data we have, like that's the group. Like center left Black and Latino people are the ones that he's down with the most. So that's also true about our people are mostly center folks, and so just kind of reassuring that he's not, going to be a socialist, I think would be helpful. We all know that, we know that's kind of silly to be concerned about that, but people need to hear it. And besides that, it's just anti-Trump. I'm sorry, like Trump has to be disqualified. Period. People have to be too freaked out. People got to, and like that's the campaign. I like winning people over for Joe Biden. I think spending a lot of effort and energy on that is probably a fool's errand. And like almost all of the energy needs to be on totally disqualifying Trump in these people's eyes and making them feel like they're too scared to vote for him.
All right, final question. You have someone in your life who is a past Trump voter, either two-time Trump voter, or maybe they voted for him once and then went to Biden, and now they're not sure what they're going to do. They're still undecided. You got a couple minutes to persuade this person to not vote for Donald Trump. What do you say?
I've got a system. Sarah, you can think about yours, because here's mine so far. We'll see if I don't know yet. I've been stress testing this, but I say, what do you think the chances are that Donald Trump won't leave? I let them answer the question. A lot of times people are like, come on. And I'm like, no, like, what do you think the percent chances are? 0%? And they'll say like, oh, no, I don't know, maybe 5. And I'll say, that's too fucking much. 5 is too high. We've never had a 5% chance. That's too high of a chance. If you believe that there's anything more than a 0% chance that Donald Trump wants to become a dictator, you cannot vote for him. Vote for every other Republican that you want. Close your ears, progressive listeners. Things are fine. Like the Senate's going to be Republican next time. Sorry, guys. Close your ears. Close your ears. Vote Save America crowd. Like, you don't have to worry that socialism's coming. You do have to worry that Donald Trump's going to be a dictator. That is my message. Again, my group, people in my life, this over-indexes on, again, that kind of college-educated Romney Biden crowd. I would probably make a different pitch if we were talking about the more working class Trump types.
Sarah?
Yeah, I would say, first of all, if I had to make the pitch, I would make it not me. Like, I shouldn't be the one pitching. And my most fervent hope actually is that one of the things that manifests as we get closer is that people who worked alongside Trump, the generals, that they come out and tell people what they saw. I think that those, as surrogates, would make an enormous difference to kind of the Wall Street Journal crowd. And I mean, don't go on background in the Atlantic. I mean, hold a press conference and say together with Kelly and Mattis and say, we cannot do this. Like, I sent young men and women to die for this democracy, and I will not allow this election to happen without me saying what I saw and how dangerous I think it would be to return this man to power. And so that, I think, would go a long way. There's a category of people who are making me, though, particularly insane that I want to fight with all the time. And it is the category, it's the anti-antis kind of, that create the permission structure for normie Republicans to not vote for Joe Biden. And they do some version of this. Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy, but I can't vote for Joe Biden either, and so neither. And I find this is a John Bolton argument, or we've got many friends who kind of do this, and I'm like, well, this is insane. If you believe that Donald Trump is an existential threat to democracy, you vote for the one person, the tomato can, that is standing between him and the White House. That's what you do. Otherwise, you are a coward, and you don't care about the country, and you are just not an adult capable of making hard choices.
I love Sarah. I just want to interfere. I don't think you should call the person in your life a coward. No, I don't think that. Like, Sarah was doing two things there. She gave a first strategy.
I was talking to John Bolton.
And then she was talking to John Bolton. I do think if you have a pundit in your life.
If the person in your life happens to be Chris Sununu.
That's right.
Then call him a coward.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Yes. But if your person in your life is like an accountant or something, probably don't call them a coward. All the rest of that, though, I endorse.
Okay, that's good. That's good advice. Sarah Longwell, Tim Miller, thank you so much for joining us. Thanks for giving us some of your insights and sharing some of the focus groups with us, and appreciate you guys.
Yeah, thanks for
Sorry,
having us.
Vote Save America, people. I didn't mean to hurt your feelings.
I'm still pulling for Sherrod and Tester. I think they might be able to pull it out.
Yeah, great, Sherrod. I hope it happens. I hope it happens.
Before we move on, I just want to strenuously object to Tim's prediction that Democrats will lose the Senate. We may, and it's certainly an uphill climb. But there's absolutely a path for candidates in the toughest races like Jon Tester and Sherrod Brown. And the best way to help them is by going to votesaveamerica.com/2024 to donate or sign up for a volunteer shift. Then, if you feel so inclined, go ahead and tweet a thank you to Tim for encouraging you to sign up. And if you want to walk away with some hope about the campaign that Ben Wikler and other Democrats are building in Wisconsin, here it is.
We just opened our 47th office. We have a presence all over the state, in every region of the state, in rural areas and suburbs and exurbs and small towns and big towns and the cities of the state, everywhere. And that means that we're able to build these neighborhood teams where folks are talking to people in their own communities. And when you talk to someone that you know from church or from high school or from work, or because you're at your cousin's wedding together, then you can start to have a conversation that goes off script.
As you heard from Sarah, Tim, and Ben, these conversations won't be easy, whether they're with perfect strangers or your closest family members, but they're important.
These should be longer conversations. This is not just checking in, making sure someone knows what the election is about. It actually starts with eliciting, asking people questions and listening to them and asking follow-up questions, finding points of common ground, finding values that they have in common.
Maybe that seems a little scary to you. Maybe it seems a little cheesy. Maybe it just seems exhausting. But whether or not we keep Donald Trump out of the White House depends on how many of these conversations each of us are willing to have between now and November. And thankfully, Ben has a roadmap for us.
The first thing is that it's okay to reassure people. And you don't want to make people feel guilty for being where they used to be. You want to make them feel safe and celebrated and not judged for being where they're kind of coming to now. So having those conversations in a tender and open and curious way can pave the way for them to have further conversations with you. Do not immediately come in and impose a giant purity test where you're asking them to agree with you about everything. Instead, really start with asking questions where you're trying to get at the root of why someone came to feel this way, and go there, and you can reflect back to them the values that you're hearing and what you appreciate about those values, but you're really looking for, what is it that cracks this open for someone? What happens ultimately for some of these voters is it's like squeezing through a keyhole, and then they come out and suddenly feel like they're 3D on the other side of it, because they pop into themselves and feel like it's okay to try on a bunch of different opinions that didn't feel safe to try on before.
I'll leave you with that. Yes, it'll be hard to go out there and persuade the persuadables in your life. But hopefully, after what you just heard, it may be just a little bit easier.